Good evening and welcome, and happy Easter. I am Robert Shine, the Executive Director of the Pax Christi International Fund for Peace, which has organized tonight's celebration of Father Joe Nangle and peacemakers around the world. If you are unfamiliar, the Pax Christi International Fund for Peace was established 11 years ago to accept tax-deductible contributions from U.S. donors to Pax Christi International, the Catholic peace movement. And among his many good works, Joe helped found the Pax Christi International Fund for Peace. Before I introduce our host for this evening, I have three technical notes. First, to make the celebration tonight more accessible, closed captioning in English is available. And to turn on the closed captions, you just need to click the CC or Show Captions button on your Zoom toolbar. It might be a different label depending on what kind of device you're joining from. Second, tonight's webinar format means neither your camera nor microphone will be turned on unless you have a speaking role, which you would know about. But if you would like, right now I invite you to put into the chat your name and the location where you're calling in from. And if you have a favorite memory of Joe, we'd welcome those. Last year we had so many wonderful ones. So I'd invite you to contribute as we begin. And finally, I want to let you know that our celebration is being recorded and we'll be sharing it publicly. So if you know someone who would have wanted to be here tonight but couldn't make it, we'd appreciate you passing it along to them. And it will be sent out once it's ready via email to everyone who registered. So with those details out of the way, I'd now like to introduce Margaret Schellenberg, who is the Pax Christi International Fund for Peace's board president. And most relevant to tonight, she is our host this evening. Margaret.
Thank you, Bob. And good evening and welcome to all of you. This is the second anniversary of celebrating Father Joe Nangle OFM and launching a legacy fund in his memory to support Pax Christi International. Our theme tonight is With Courage to Hope, a tribute to Joe, who always preached the necessity for hope as part of the inbreaking of the kingdom of God in the here and now. So we were gathered as a people of hope this evening to celebrate Joe, a beloved friend, an extraordinary Franciscan prophet, pastor, peacemaker, and community member. Joe was also a super fundraiser and a founding board member of the Fund for Peace. In his final days before passing in December 2024, Joe was very pleased to know that a legacy fund in his name would be established to support Pax Christi International. We will share in more detail just what the fund supports. But first, we will pause for a moment of prayer, recalling the spirituality of nonviolence and the need to care for creation, to which Joe was greatly committed. Marie Dennis, who worked directly with Joe and is now Senior Director of the Catholic Institute for Nonviolence, will read an excerpt from Joe's writings. Then Fund for Peace board member and secular Franciscan leader Carolyn Towns will offer an opening prayer.
Never before have human beings experienced what our common home looks like from the vast expanses of Earth's solar system. Formerly, we could measure distances from Earth to Sun, Moon, and other planets. We came to know, for example, that the Sun is some 93.5 million miles from us, that the farthest planet away from us, Neptune, is an astounding 2.5 billion miles away. Still, these findings were more scientific data than lived experience. However, In the mid-20th century, human genius enabled us to leave Earth's atmosphere, circle it in outer space, and incredibly send persons to the moon and return them safely. These new moments in the history of humanity have allowed fortunate, brave women and men astronauts to reflect on the experience of looking from the windows of their space capsules at this vibrant blue and white sphere, a fragile living object, or in the famous description of scientist and astronomer Carl Sagan, a pale blue dot. "Look again at that dot," he said. "That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you knew, the aggregate of our joys and suffering." The Catholic Christian tradition has a vital word to add here. We hold that this pale blue dot and the seemingly endless spaces and stellar bodies around us have been created by the one whom we worship as incomprehensible mystery, the I Am. And even more incredibly, this divine being has come among us as God's Word made incarnate.
And God saw all that was made, and indeed it was very good. Let us pray. Loving God, you who gazed upon the earth and called it good, the rivers and the mountains, the soaring birds and hidden seeds, every creature, every people, every fragile hope, open our eyes to see as you see. In a world that too often forgets its goodness, where violence scars both land and lives, where the cry of the poor and the cry of the earth rise together, call us back to reverence. We remember today the life of your servant, Father Joe, a man who believed deeply in your dream for creation, who walked gently upon this earth and stood firmly with those pushed to its edges. May his witness stir something alive within us, a courage that is nonviolent, a love that is active, a faith that refuses to turn away. Teach us, like St. Francis of Assisi, to call all of creation our kin, brother sun, sister moon, and every neighbor near and far. May we protect what is sacred, restore what has been broken, and choose again and again the way of peace. Bless this gathering and bless the work of the Joe Nangle Fund for a Nonviolent Future, that it may help heal a wounded world and nurture the seeds of justice, compassion, and hope. We ask this in the spirit of love that makes all things new. Amen.
Thank you, Marie and Carolyn, for your beautiful words, for helping us begin in a spirit of prayer and knowing that God's presence is with us tonight. We are filled with awe as we view that same beautiful blue dot from Artemis 2 this weekend as it reaches for the moon again. It is my real privilege to be able to introduce Bishop John Stowe, the Bishop of Lexington, Kentucky. Fittingly for tonight, he is both a Franciscan priest and the Bishop President of Pax Christi USA. Having first become involved in Pax Christi while a graduate student at the Jesuit School of Theology. Before being appointed to Lexington by Pope Francis in 2015, Bishop John held leadership positions in the Diocese of El Paso and the Conventual Franciscans Province of Our Lady of Consolation. He is an outspoken advocate for the marginalized, including for migrants, LGBTQ people and women, and a forceful voice in the U.S. Church today for peace and justice against authoritarianism. Bishop John will offer reflection for us tonight, so welcome, and we look forward to hear what you have to say.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be with all of you this evening as we remember a fine Franciscan brother, as we remember a great witness for peace, as we remember a great proclaimer of the life of the Word made flesh. It's fitting that we gather in honor of Joe Nangle during the octave of Easter, so soon after Easter Sunday, when we recall Jesus appearing to the disciples after his resurrection and greeting them with a message of peace, and then further describing how that peace comes about in the world. It's through letting go, it's through forgiveness, it's through the overcoming of past hurts, it's through proclaiming the love and the victory of God over all that can harm us. It is also very difficult not to think of Pope Francis, who just a year ago, when we were last celebrating Easter, had his final plea for peace proclaimed from the balcony of St. Peter's on the day when he traditionally would bless the city and the world. On that Easter, he was too weak to read the message himself. He had to depend on an aide to do so, but the words were strong. And the words were challenging, and the words were hopeful for a peace that could last. And he entrusted our desire for that peace to the risen Christ. Then it was only a matter of weeks later that a new pope, an American pope, would step out on that same balcony and offer his first words of greeting, the same words of the risen Christ, "Peace be with you," and pick up on the very same theme that Pope Francis had left us as a legacy. Father Joe left us and returned to the Father in the Advent season of 2024. In Advent, the whole church dreams with the prophet Isaiah about the day of the Lord, about a new time of hope, about the desert flowering, about springs of water coming through the dry land, about nations beating their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks, dreams about lions and lambs walking together, and the world being led by a little child. How far we have seemed to be each Advent and Christmas from seeing those dreams realized. It's wonderful to think that Joe goes before us to see how it will come about, and we rely upon his intercession now from his place on high. There is so much power in the peace that Christ offers, a power much greater than the power of death and war and violence. When we think about Jesus visiting the apostles in the upper room on the night of his resurrection, and then, as we'll hear in the liturgy again next Sunday, meeting them in the same place at the same time with the same words, "Peace be with you," it would be shocking for someone to come back, not only from the grave, but to come back from a violent death and not be seeking revenge, not protesting about their innocence, not insisting that with might things would be set right, but rather sending the apostles forward to continue his work through a ministry of forgiveness, through a ministry of pardon, through a ministry of inviting people to a new beginning. Joe Nangle departed this world with a firm hope in the coming of that day of the Lord. Joe Nangle taught us by example with a firm commitment to the Prince of Peace. Joe suffered, as I believe Pope Francis did, to see the disregard for the sanctity of human life in the way people are exploited, in the way that bombs and terrorism continues to threaten the people of God, in the ways that we don't respect and honor one another as reflections also of the Word made flesh. And in December of 2024, when Joe was called home by the Lord, how many conflicts were afflicting the earth at that time? Many of them have not gotten any better. The violence in Haiti continues, with people fighting against each other and many people fearful and incapable of moving forward. We think about a civil war in Myanmar that continues. We think about the consequences of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and how that war continues. We think about the Congo and the various dimensions to the fight that continues there. We think about Somalia and Sudan, which has gone on for so long. We think about Gaza, which is only overshadowed by further violence in that part of the world. As we were just watching that video of seeing the earth from a distance, I couldn't help but notice where we started our focus. You could clearly see Africa and Saudi Arabia, a little bit of the Middle East. And think about how many places are still afflicted by war in the parts of the world that we're focused on. And then as the video moved and closed, we saw South America. We can think about Venezuela and other places that have suffered so much violence, so much harm, and where there seems to be so little of a pathway forward to freedom and an end of war. We can think about Israel, and the time Joe left this world, there was ongoing wars with Lebanon and Syria, and we can see why it's so fitting to name this fund for Joe Nangle with a commitment to a nonviolent future. Part of that great dream of Isaiah, the great dream of Jesus, the great dream of Joe. I know that Joe was blessed to be alive for more than a decade of Pope Francis's papacy. Francis didn't outlive him by all that much. I think as a Franciscan and as a lover of peace and as somebody who committed a good portion of his life to Latin America and was forever changed by that commitment, as someone who really came to understand the importance of mission and led so many people to a missionary experience of living the gospel, how overjoyed he must have been to see this dream of a pope named Francis become reality. I'm sure he was touched by the name that Francis chose on that day when he appeared on the balcony for the first time. I'm sure he was pleased that a pope came from Latin America, or as Francis himself put it, from the ends of the earth to be Bishop of Rome. He would have shared in Francis's constant references to joy, the joy of the gospel, the joy of love, the joy of proclaiming the good news, the joy of community, all the ways that Francis not only talked about and wrote about joy, but depicted it, from the expressions of his face to the joy that he brought everyone who had an encounter with him. And Francis would be the first to say that an encounter with Christ is the source of that joy. He only gave a sample of it. Joe must have liked the simple dress of Pope Francis and how Francis so effectively deflected the spotlight of the world that he was uncomfortable with shining on him, deflecting it towards the places that most needed attention. That sounds like Joe in lots of ways as well. Francis had a great spirit in his magisterial teachings, a spirit that captured the essence of Francis of Assisi. Who would have known it would take a Jesuit pope named Francis to do that? But from the encyclical that is still bearing fruit, Laudato Si, calling us to really care for the gift of creation and to recognize our connection to all of creation, to the call to universal fraternity, brotherhood and sisterhood issued in Fratelli Tutti, also inspired by the writings and the witness of Francis of Assisi. That infectious smile that we saw on the image of Joe and so many of the pictures here was very similar to that which we saw in Pope Francis, because both of them knew the value of encounters. encounters with the risen Christ, encounters with Christ in the poor, encounters with our own relationships that we cultivate and hold sacred, encounters of friendship, and the surprise encounters when Christ comes to us unbidden and unrecognized at first. And then how we take on the responsibility to draw near to those in need and try to extend and include others in those encounters. I think Joe's Franciscan life, his priestly life, his ministerial life was a constant series of such encounters. And even the witnesses and the chats that are described tonight give a little glimpse of all those encounters, how life-giving they were for Joe, how life-giving they were for the people that encountered Joe. I could just think about how Joe must have appreciated seeing before he died a pope that envisioned so much of what he loved about his faith, about his tradition, about his Franciscanism, about the world, and seeing somebody in a position of leadership trying to bring that about. Even the World Day of Prayer for Peace address by the Holy Father in 2017, calling for nonviolence to take its place, its rightful place in the Christian tradition, and all of his emphasis on peacemaking. How often did Francis plead for an end to war, pleading with Russian ambassadors, pleading with Our Lady and our Lord, and so many public occasions, walking into or being pushed in a wheelchair into a war zone in the Congo and addressing those who had suffered loss through war. So much of Pope Francis's pontificate was about calling us to the peace that only comes from Christ. And of course, as we observe the beginnings of the pontificate of the first American Pope, it's very important to remember it was an American Pope who was in Peru and had been called from Peru to Rome, a place that became dear to Joe as well, and whose impact had a profound effect on Joe. Our current American Pope was considered the least American of the cardinals when he was elected, so much so that it wasn't an impediment to him taking on that high office. And he certainly hasn't disappointed as he calls for peace in the midst of the conflicts and the outrageous violence perpetrated by the United States government right now under a leader who most of the world considers mad. Yeah, Joe lived long enough to witness the re-election of Trump, which must have been a heavy thing to see, but he was spared from seeing what was unleashed when Trump took power a month later. Just think about how Joe would have felt watching these raids of ICE coming into communities and pulling people from vehicles, wearing masks and coming in unmarked cars, so violently afflicting the people of God who were doing nothing but raise their children, contribute to society, work, and try to live a life better than what they knew in their homelands, even as they loved their homelands. We think about the combative pursuit of the undocumented that was unleashed. We think about the cancellation of U.S. aid and foreign aid programs so quickly in the Trump administration. We see with the partnerships and friendships with the most vile of dictators. And we think of tax cuts for billionaires at the cost of health care and existence for so many. And now this unholy alliance with Israel, with no discipline whatsoever and no instincts held back. Not only a denial of the just war principles moving towards war, but even a refusal to say that the United States would abide by just principles in war. We just came through Holy Week. We just came through a week which began by reading Matthew's Passion which itself begins with Jesus being betrayed by Judas, Judas making a deal behind the scenes, Judas asking, "What's in it for me?" That was so far from the question that Joe Nangle asked. It's so far from the questions that we ask as Pax Christi. It's so far from the questions of Pope Francis or of Jesus or of the best of our tradition. We know that it's a life of service. We know that it's a life poured out in love for others. We know it's a series of foot washings and putting ourselves in harm's way in order to rescue somebody else. It was faithfulness to the Jesus who told Peter to put his sword back in the scabbard because those who live by the sword will die by the sword. Yeah, Easter reminds us of the principles of the Prince of Peace. It reminds us that peace and love are more powerful than violence and hatred. It reminds us that sometimes we who wish to be peacemakers and peace builders will have to absorb violence in ourselves rather than contribute to that violence and letting it escalate in the world. It is a desire to root out from our hearts any kinds of tendency toward violence. Even when we hear our president speak, we have to denounce the very reactions that come up from our hearts so that we might contribute to a more peaceful existence. Joe taught us well. He taught us well within our Franciscan, Christian, Catholic tradition about cherishing people, about why the Word became flesh, about building friendships and relationships as the way forward and the way out of violence, about learning about different cultures and different places and seeing how people in small groups can make a difference and building up those people. It was about the prayer and the study and the action that are foundational to Pax Christi's method. Thank you, Joe, for a great witness. Thank you, Joe, for your infectious smile. Thank you, Joe, for reminding us that we follow a nonviolent Lord. And thank you for showing us the way. May we keep your memory alive as we work for a less violent world. And we certainly have our work cut out for us. God bless you all, and may the peace of the risen Christ be with you.
Thank you, Bishop Stowe. I was very teary-eyed during that. It just brought back so much for me, and I'm sure it did for other people too. It was just wonderful. You wrapped up so much of Joe's life and so much of what's going on in our world today. Thank you again.
I did spend 15 years in Latin America. So when I came back, it was kind of a natural, the Hispanic communities were growing. And as I say, they asked me since I spoke Spanish, they asked me to come here. It would have been one of a number of places where I could have gone. And I really wanted to do it because I came back for a lot of circumstances, but I came back kind of like a missionary to the United States. I felt like we need some of what the Latin American church has been talking about. There was a woman whom I wrote about in the book who represented all that was wrong with, the third world and the great gap between the haves and the have-nots. And she made an enormous impression on me. I think she probably was the instrument of my conversion. When I saw life through her eyes, I realized that this world is not the way it ought to be, and people like her need to be liberated, really, from all kinds of. She was a very, very poor Indian person in Peru, and I got to know her fairly well. That probably was the moment when I said something has to change here. And when I met her and when I came to know her, the preaching was never the same again. It was always kind of, we have to be about the reign of God, justice, peace, mercy. Yeah. When you think about what it means to come to the table and receive the bread of life in equal portions, doesn't that say something about the inequality that we have in our world? And then, of course, the whole underpinning of the liturgy, that he died because he was a threat to the status quo. John's Gospel towards the end of Lent says, it's better for one man to die than the whole nation perish. He was a threat. He was practicing and preaching justice. And so when we celebrate his dying and rising, we're celebrating the fact that he stood over against the injustices of his time, and we're called to do the same. For me, I think what justice looks like is when people who are good Christian, practicing Catholics, when they begin to say, so how does my profession affect the poor? If I'm a lawyer, for example, am I supporting a system of injustice in practicing my profession? Or have I put myself on the side of the poor to question the injustices around, and so forth? It seems to me that in a parish like this, the best message, and I think we do preach it here, is to say, what is it like to be a Catholic Christian out there trying to build the reign of God, which begins with justice and ends with love, of course. Yeah.
Yes. Martha Inés Romero has been Secretary General of Pax Christi International since 2023. Hailing from Colombia, she served as coordinator of Pax Christi International's Latin America and Caribbean programs for 14 years and as a PCI board member. An advisor to Caritas Internationalis and several of its affiliates, she previously worked for Catholic Relief Services in Oxfam, Great Britain, managing development, humanitarian, and peace and reconciliation programs. Martha Inés has a master's in development project management, studied peace and conflict transformation at the University of Notre Dame's Kroc Institute, and a diploma in international development cooperation from the University of Oviedo's Peace Institute in Spain. Martha Inés, it's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you very much, dear Margaret. Thank you, Bishop Stowe, for this very touching speech. It's my dear Joe Nangle. He was a very special person in the Pax Christi family, and as it has said, it was the co-founder of Pax Christi International Fund for Peace, and he remained a committed board member and advisor, promoting our mission in the United States with great passion. And his experience in Latin America is present in many places, many people who were touched by him, by his mission, by his compassion and commitment with those, the marginalized, those discarded by this unjust system. So good evening, everyone. Greetings and happy Easter from Medellin, Colombia, my country. So today I'll continue as you honoring Joe Nangle, and Joe is always presente por siempre in our hearts. So Pax Christi International, as you have seen in this logo, had its 80th anniversary last year. So we started in March and ended in Florence in Italy. in November. So there are many activities around it. And if possible, at the end of my speech, I will present some pictures to show you how we live this. More than 30 different nationalities, more than 80 people attending this and referring to our values. So Pax Christi International and its work has been very important for many. So I will present some ideas about how we are working together for all the global movement, but also from the International Secretariat. Our mission as Pax Christi International, it has been very rooted in the gospel, in our believing that peace is possible. And we were working based on inspired by faith. And our vision is a world where people can live in peace without fear of violence in all its forms. So today I will share with you some ideas about what we are doing in our International Secretariat. This is our leadership, conformed by two bishops, Bishop Mark Stanger, or Emeritus, and Bishop Colin Bagaforo from the Philippines, Mark from France, and Sister Wamuyu from Kenya. They are our leaders. And this is our work. And since December 2025, Pax Christi has a new board from the leadership in our movement. And it is important to know that 16 members are conforming this board, and 12 of them are new from the Global South, including our dear treasurer, Maggie Galley from Australia, today present in this honoring of Father Joe. This is our team, people from different nationalities and living in different countries. Our office is based in Brussels, but all of them are working from this multicultural approach and working together in a very good effort for the benefit of the movement. So our Pax Christi movement, it has two different roles. First, it is a role of the prophetic, because it is rooted in our gospel. So it reads and interprets the sign of the times. We act in solidarity with compassion with those more marginalized, excluded. But at the same time, we are spreading signs of hope amongst our constituencies. So we are sharing this sense of humanity in this multicultural peace movement in the 5 continents, more than 100 of associates and members. And we advocate at the peripheries for those at the peripheries speaking out, sometimes bringing them to these tables. So diplomacy for peace and justice is very important for us. In these times where diplomacy is in high crisis, the multilateralism has been very affected by the leaders currently implementing wars and invading and promoting nuclear issues. And we are building bridges. It was our motto for this anniversary, because we continue building bridges and peace builders, embracing the just peace ethics from the North and the South, promoting horizontal relations amongst our members. So our mission and programs, at the center of everything, it is the gospel nonviolence. So our mission is as a diverse, faith-based global network. We seek to create cultures of peace and reconciliation that will transform a world shaken by violence, terrorism, deepening inequalities, and global insecurity. Pax Christi strives to ensure that local voices are elevated to solve the challenges of war and violence specific to their contexts. And we work in 3 axes. The first, it is empowering communities. So we accompany communities. And the second is strengthening the Catholic Church and the church people of God. And the third, it is to impacting policies, public policies around the world. So the empowering communities, we work with communities in Africa, in the Asia Pacific region, very long territory, and in Latin America and the Caribbean, directly accompanying our partners with their communities in strengthening their ties and promoting social cohesion and active nonviolence. Related to the advocacy impacting policies, we work at the global priorities in working groups. It is the methodology we decided to work with from some years ago. So there are these priorities for our movement right now: integral human disarmament and security, a just peace in the Holy Land, ecological justice and energy transition. Coming from our experience in Latin America, we're promoting this global priority now, and the Youth Forum. All of them are conformed, these working groups, by experts, members of the movement, and some peace practitioners. And we have also regional advocacy groups. In the issue related to Africa, we accompany those who have been affected by violence, like the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Sudan, for example, with a huge crisis, humanitarian and human rights crisis. In Europe, we are promoting this region, working on disarmament and objection consciousness. In Latin America, we promote those advocacy issue related to the binding business and human rights treaty, all related to due diligence, related to critical minerals, because we are one of the continents producing or having critical minerals, in the importance for the transition energy, but not on energy transition, but not only for that, but also for the defense and security. So the issue related to Venezuela was not only because of the oil, but also because of 17 critical minerals. And in the region of Asia Pacific, we accompany those advocacy efforts related to disarmament, nuclear disarmament, democracy, and promoting active nonviolence. So representation, networking, and partnership. For us, it's important to go together in our work with others, to articulate with others. So we are working strongly with other networks, some of them faith-based networks, others are civil society, lay organizations, but we are promoting together policy changes. We are promoting campaigns and some activities to move to a change in this unjust world. Then the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, it is one of our main programs. As you can see, this picture is impacting, reflecting what we do. All the nonviolence is in the center of what we do. We work with grassroots communities. We organize hope in the sense of collecting people to work together for a nonviolent world. And since 2024, we launched the Institute, Catholic Institute for Nonviolence, with 3 areas of concentration. The Catholic Institute has been promoted to, the CNI has 3 goals. Nonviolence is central to Catholic life and cross-cutting in Catholic social teaching. The Church regularly applies a nonviolence-centered framework, and church structures teach and promote nonviolence to educate and mobilize Christians, Catholics. And the mission of the Institute is to make nonviolence research, resources, and experience more accessible to Catholic Church leaders, communities, and institutions through trainings, through reflections, through research, and many other things. I want to remark this issue related to our program, the nexus about the local and the global. We can't speak and we can't work for justice and nonviolence without promoting these strengthening capacities or accompany our communities to defend their land, their lands, their rights in many ways. So in Africa, for example, we promote these strengthening capacities for religious sisters who trained later young people in active nonviolence, in trauma healing, in nonviolent communications, and many others. And in Latin America, because Joe worked in Latin America, we have a good examples of what we are doing in strengthening and empowering these communities in good governance in terms of how to defend their life and active nonviolent methods, and to support campaigns like the Water for Life, a campaign who advocates for clean, adequate, and accessible water for all. And of course, we share resources to promote advocacy at many levels. We were present in some of the COPs, in COP 30, in the COP 16 on biodiversity. We promote the Escazú agreement at the continental level. We're promoting those important decision-making bodies to impact, to change, to apply, to respect the rights of many. In the picture, you see many women working in a beautiful process for land governance and defending their territories from a nonviolent approach. It has been a process. It is a process, not only trainings, but a process to accompany them in their process of defending their rights and their land. Our goal in the Latin American program, it is to, for communities in Latin America and the Caribbean, advancing in peace building with social and environmental justice, based on proposal for a dignified life and land governance in a fair, democratic, and ecological way as an alternative to the extractivist model that is deepening in the region within the framework of the energy transition and the false solution. We are supporting the platform on divesting mining. We concluded that it is not coherent with we as Catholics are promoting the investment in those banks or corporations that are affecting the land and the people in our region. So this is what we do from a nonviolent approach. Let me share just to finish my presentation. This is from our 80th anniversary. We honor all our people, including Joe, and we dance, we pray, we reflect, we share from all of each working groups in terms of the nuclear disarmament. We meet together with our former Secretary Generals. We honor the young people building a new Pax Christi International and the intergenerational dialogue amongst our old people, and the dialogue, the very necessary in terms of our different contexts. And of course, our co-presidents, we honor this process in a way that the Peace Award was directly to a person, but a people, to people committed with the migration crisis and the decision to confront the administration, the Trump administration, from radical decision to protect those migrants. Bishop Mark Seitz at that time, he was at the USCCB assembly, but it was the auxiliary present there in receiving the Peace Award. And it was the time also to honor the Annunciation House and other programs working with migrants in the border. So it was our time to honor our bishop as emeritus, and it was a very good time for all of us. And we continue honoring those like Father Joe, who has given life to those and hope to those who are suffering in this movement. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Martha Inés, for giving us a very condensed view of all that Pax Christi International is doing worldwide. As we come to the end of our time together tonight, I'd like to share one more video from Joe talking about Easter and hope.
I have just, I suppose, a couple of words that the future is bright. I do think that we need to really cultivate the virtue of hope, theological hope, that not a pie in the sky, but the fact that we believe in resurrection, we believe in the new creation, the kingdom of God breaking in on human history. That hope is a virtue, has to be cultivated, because all of the evidence around us militates against hope. So I think if I had one word to offer, it would be that hope, as Paul Francis describes it. A real grasp of the fact that we are Easter people, and we believe in the ultimate triumph of the will of God in the new creation.
So as we've heard from Bishop Stowe, from Martha Inés, and from Joe through the videos we have of him, there's a lot of peacemaking being done. There are a lot of people all around the world who, in their daily lives, are building bridges and reconciling and advocating for more just policies for all who suffer oppression. And Martha Inés was able to give you a good overview of what Pax Christi International does, although we could spend probably an hour just talking about all the different aspects of the Secretariat's work and our presence at the United Nations and the European Union and the trainings that Dieudonné does, and that the work in the Holy Land with a delegation of Pax Christi folks last November. There's just so much happening. And it's definitely work that gives me hope. Now, if you knew Joe, and we knew him through homilies and his prophetic witness and his many writings and the pastoral care and just the immense love that he showed us, but you also probably knew that he was a prolific fundraiser. And if you hung around long enough, probably at some point he asked you to invest in the cause of peace. And so, channeling that spirit tonight, I'd like to ask you to support Pax Christi International. Pax Christi International work is largely reliant on the generosity of individuals like yourselves who believe that a Catholic peace movement is important. Since we launched the Joe Nangle OFM Fund for a Nonviolent Future last year, it has been impressive how many of you, his family, friends, colleagues, collaborators, have helped make this fund a way of honoring the work that he did and continuing that work into the future with new generations. If you are a donor, if you've made a gift this year to the fund, I want to thank you so very much for that generosity. And I'd invite you to share in the chat, if you'd like, why you support Pax Christi International and the Catholic Peace Movement. And if you haven't had a chance to make a gift yet, I'd invite you to do so. You can do that by scanning the QR code on the screen, by visiting www.paxchristifund.org/donate. And that link will be dropped into the chat now. And you can also contact us. My email is shine@paxchristifund.org. If you'd prefer to make another type of gift, I'd be happy to have a conversation and help you out. Your support for the Catholic Peace Movement is essential. And I can't help but conclude tonight with all our discussions of hope by emphasizing a little bit about the courage, also in the title of tonight's event. We are just about 24 hours from when President Trump has threatened immense violence, continuation of the violence against the people of Iran and so many places. And it seems that each day when we open our phone to read the news, that there's some new horror. But I hope that this evening, this time together, will have given us each a little bit more courage to take action, to take one step further towards the cause of peace than we might have otherwise done. We're very, very grateful you could be with us. We're very, very grateful for your support of Pax Christi International and all of the many ways that you help build peace and justice. And with that, I'd just like to ask you to mark your calendars for next Easter Monday, which is March 29th, 2027, when we will have our third annual benefit for the Joe Nangle OFM Fund for a Nonviolent Future. So thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for continuing Joe's work in your daily efforts. Thank you for sustaining Pax Christi International. And thank you for giving me and so many others the courage to hope. May this Easter season grant us all more and more of that hope as we journey towards the nonviolent future to which God invites us. Thank you and good night.